She was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black, this individual said, drawing a smattering of jeers from an audience of about 1,000 people. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black, Trump? This individual continued. But now listen, I actually have a little bit of sympathy for him. But you know what? I respect either one, said this person. But she obviously doesn't, because she was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn and she became a black person. Harris, who is of Indian Jamaican heritage, has long self-identified as both black and Asian. This is the person of which the person spoke. She is the first black person and Asian American president to serve as vice president. So I'm going to ask you, I'm going to use a term that I've been reading about, and I want people to come up and take a picture of this book before you leave today with your phone, and I'm encouraging everyone to read it. At home, this is an incredible book that helps us to understand the importance of those moments when we do a subtle act of exclusion, meaning we say something or we do something that doesn't make a person feel included. So, as I said, on my best day, I give the former president grace. He did ask the journalist to define what DEI means, after all, diversity, equity, and inclusion. On most days, I can't say aloud what I think because it may hurt me in the pursuit of my profession. Also, many times I can't find the words to describe my thoughts. The absurdity of the world in which we exist is so profound. Okay. Let's pause for a minute. You and I, as Unitarian Universalists, pride ourselves on being woke. That is, we work hard at learning how to treat friends and foes alike with dignity. And yet, often, it is the subtle action or words that we use that can set people apart, creating relationships charged with hurt and misunderstandings. It involves understanding or recognizing how subtle acts of exclusion or microaggressions, maybe you've heard that term, end up raising this wall that keeps us from forming stronger bonds with one another. Tiffany Jana and Michael Barn, authors of Subtle Acts of Exclusion, said that in order to truly address, quote, the subtle acts of exclusion, we need to collectively shift both our mindset and our behaviors. So today I intend to address this topic as it pertains to racism, sexism, classism. As has been said so many times, we are swimming in a culture that no longer serves our intent to cherish diversity. And yet, almost every value we cherish, do you know these values that were voted on and incorporated in June? Justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, generosity, all of these things we work on in the name of love. This all applies to dignity and worth. Therefore, we make it our faith calling to be respectful and inclusive. I say this a million times. You all invited me here to persistently remind you, all of us, what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist. I know I can be annoying, but this is what you asked me to do. So, Unitarian Ralph Waldo Emerson, he was a minister, Unitarian in our faith, said, "Our faith comes in moments. Our vice is habitual." We all have a habit of vice, though through words and actions of committing subtle acts of exclusion. Let's name a few today so we become more aware of how we fall short of extending mutual trust. If you're constantly saying things or acting in a way that makes a person feel invisible or less than normal or bad, we're not going to create relationships of trust. So this week I'm going to share part 1 that includes examples of occasions when a subtle act of exclusion occurs. And then next Sunday I want to do part 2 that includes when we do a microaggression or a subtle act of exclusion, how do we learn to forgive ourselves and others? Author Tiffany Jana wrote, when race, nationality, sexual orientation, gender, faith, political affiliation, socioeconomic class, disability, and other identities differ greatly from our own, we can sometimes dismiss the pain and experiences of others far too quickly. Of course, this is not ultimately or universally true, she said, but if it were not true, we would not need movements like Black Lives Matter against violence and systemic racism toward Black people, especially the Me Too movement against sexual harassment and sexual assault, and won't be erased civil rights for transgender people. To raise the voices and visibility of those suffering the injustice of a societal lack of compassion. My connectedness, she wrote, to so many communities. This author is a Black woman, is both a woman and identifies as Black. She says, I speak particularly the more historically marginalized ones. I'm part of that group. This affords me the privilege of seeing, feeling, and understanding a broad array of experiences. When someone else's pain becomes your own, it's easier to serve your fellow human as an ally, a friend, and a co-conspirator instead of just being a motionless bystander. Now, the other author, Dr. Michael Baran, wrote, I learned to recognize how cultures can be infused with subtle messages about what is considered, remember, what is considered normal or abnormal, what is considered good or bad about a person. Those messages get reinforced through representations we can see and hear, but also through daily interactions like subtle acts of exclusion. Seeing how that happens is essential if our goal is to eventually help people learn how to interrupt those problematic interactions and create different and more inclusive messages about everyone being normal and good. I started working on ways to open people up to those conversations, and you'll hear his experiences in this book. And he said, in order to inoculate against the defensiveness when building deep understanding. Everyone, myself included, everyone commits subtle acts of exclusion, sometimes even people with marginalized identities. My goal is to help us all interrupt the problematic thought processes that lead to subtle acts of exclusion. Okay, many of you know I took a break. I do every year, many UU ministers do, for a few weeks in the summer. And in one day, I encountered 3 young women who were clerks. 2 of them were clerks in the same store, and one of them was a clerk in a grocery store. When I had interactions with them, I smiled and said, thank you. How was your day? So nice to meet you. To cajole them into smiling, or at the very least, appearing friendly. They didn't move. They didn't smile. So I thought to myself, well, gee whiz, what a difference it would make if you would put a smile on your face. Now, a good thing I didn't say it, but I thought it because I've been swimming in a culture that says, oh, everybody should smile, especially young women. How many times I've heard a couple times, many women I'm sure, at least twice that I can think of, boy, you sure would be prettier if you smiled more often. And then I ran through all the scenarios about why a young woman might not want to smile. You know, the realization that identifying as female meant less pay than men in many professions. The fact that a young person is often not afforded respect for having valid ideas. Or the troubling truth that clothes and shoes for women cost a heck of a lot more than clothes and shoes for men. This is true. So if you can recognize it before it falls out of your mouth, that's the goal. Subtle acts of exclusion go in all directions. Men experience them as well. When my son was little, I don't know, maybe 5, he experimented with an idea. He tied a wagon to his bicycle. It didn't have the training wheels, and he was new to riding a bike anyway, but he tied a wagon to the back of his bicycle, and I saw him take off in the driveway down to the neighbor's house. I turned around, and next thing I know, he came yelling in the house, screaming, "That wasn't such a good idea." And he was holding his shoulder. Oh, the sound of his cry was so high-pitched. At a gut level, I knew something was wrong. His father said, hey, man up, little boy. Stop your crying. Now, there was no judgment. There was no time at that time to have a conversation with his father at the time. We headed straight to the emergency room, and he did indeed break his shoulder. But I've never forgotten the sexist statement. I had no grudge, and I still hold no grudge on his father. I know many men in this room have also been made to feel bad or less than normal for weeping. It's in our culture, and yet it's normal to be sad. You and I swim in a sea of subtle and not so subtle thoughts and behaviors that tend to make others feel inadequate, invisible, a threat, a burden, less than normal, or not a worthy individual. So on the topic of sexism, I need to share one more. A woman who worked for a law firm told a friend, "Twice now, my boss, who is a tall elderly man, looked at my chest when he spoke to me." The friend said, "You need to go to HR immediately." The woman said, "I know, it's not right, but he's my boss. I risk losing my job if I say something." The other reason why I have not gone to HR is that maybe she's offering him grace. Maybe he can't hear me. After all, he leans closer when I speak. Maybe he doesn't know he's doing it. Now, let me ask you, if you were in the role of boss, would you be defensive if a woman came to you and told you what she experienced? Would you say, "I didn't do that, you're out of your mind"? Or would you say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I had no idea, thank you for telling me. That's what it feels like. That's the impact of me bending over feels like, and it makes you uncomfortable." So the twist in these subtle acts of aggression isn't explaining away why you had a behavior, but first of all, addressing the impact of the behavior. When a person can be humble and open to hearing the truth, change occurs. When a person jumps to defensiveness by saying, "I didn't do that," trust disintegrates. When you say, "Well, my intention was good," and disregard the impact that the action or words have had, it reveals that the person is focused more on saving face than on honoring the other person. So let us build trust by saying, first, thank you. In any case, when someone points out something that was hurtful, that was said or done that felt hurtful or uncomfortable, thank you for telling me how my actions or words have hurt or harmed you. I'm sorry. I will try to do better, and I'm so grateful that you trusted me enough to tell me. Many subtle acts of exclusion occur because people take their curiosity, their concern, nosiness too far, to a desire to make people laugh, even if you want to make an honest attempt to catch yourself when you're inclined to make a statement or behave in a way that falls into the category of a subtle act of exclusion. See if this message is conveyed. Okay, so I don't know, I'm at an older stage in my life, some of you are older, and it's easy to go, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sick and tired of constantly doing the wrong thing or being told I'm saying something wrong." But you know, it's a reminder. We're not where we used to be. Sexism, we don't want that anymore. Racism, we don't want it. Classism, there's so much work that we have to do. And so this one jumped out at me. When I'm relating to another person, have I said or acted in a way that makes them feel not normal? Have I said something out of curiosity that might make them uncomfortable? Have I said something that makes them feel like it's a threat or a burden? All of these categories imply that a person does not have as much dignity as others. Did you hear in the video earlier with the children, the young boy who said, a person said, you're a waste of life? Oh, boy, did that cut me to the quick, right? That says you have no dignity. You're not worthy. For example, disregarding a person's name because it's too hard to pronounce or to get right, or laughing at it as a subtle act of exclusion. This has happened. At the Oscars in 2017, Jimmy Kimmel, and it's easy to laugh, but then when you step back and you go, oh boy, how would that person feel? Jimmy Kimmel subtly implied that only white-sounding names are normal. Here is the scenario. When a group of unsuspecting tourists entered the award show, Kimmel asked a woman what her name was. She answered, Ulrich. Kimmel made an expression of shock and said, what? Obviously, accustomed to this response, Ulrich said, it rhymes with jewelry. Ulrich, jewelry. Kimmel said, wow, that's some name. He then asked the man she was walking with his name. The man replied, my name is Patrick. And Kimmel said, see, that's a name. Now, I know when you're used to laughing at a comedian, it's easy to laugh, but if you pause and you say, what I just witnessed, was that something that makes this person feel not normal because her name was different? The implicit message is that white, Western-sounding names are legitimate while others are not. In the broadcast, you can see Ulrich laughing, and yet the idea that her name is an odd curiosity probably lost its humor a long time ago. Many, in fact, pointed out on Twitter that Kimmel's problematic joke was probably not a good idea. This thing about names often exists when people learn the name of persons of color, of African, Puerto Rican, and Jamaican history. Now, as Kamala runs for president, what's in a name has a whole new meaning, doesn't it? It's all over social media. The comma with L-A after it. There's a reason. People want you to know to pronounce the name correctly because it deems importance. This person will not be invisible. This person will not be less than adequate because we're all going to work hard on pronouncing the name correctly. I hope this rings true with other people in our congregation, in our community that we meet. The name Sibi comes to mind. The name Eliseo comes to mind. The name Soledad comes to mind. If you meet someone and they give you their name and you're too embarrassed to ask, can you pronounce it again? Can you say it slowly? Can you write it for me? That's okay. Ask, because it shows that you deem them important and you want to identify them correctly. I want to say another one. If somebody said your pronoun wrong, this is where we are. We're not where we used to be, that it's just she and her. They, them is part of it. When somebody says your pronoun wrong, it's okay to say, I identify as a they. It's okay, and don't be defensive. Say, got it. I'll work on that. The last subtle act of exclusion I want to address this morning pertains to abilities in diverse ways that abilities manifest in humans. A perfect example pertains to the microphone. Now, it's not just here. So, no, it's not anybody in this space that I'm talking about. It's other places, too. So when we have meetings and workshops, or even here when we meet here, and somebody says something, and everybody goes, use the microphone, and our first reaction is, I'll yell. And that's not the point. It's not about whether you can raise your voice and so people can hear. It's that the microphone is a way that we are accommodating and being inclusive to people who have hearing challenges here. I print out my sermon every Sunday because I know that some people have hearing challenges and I don't always speak clearly or slowly, or it doesn't come out of the microphone or the speaker correctly. So I want people to know you are important here, you're included. Phil and I love the theater. we go to American Stage in St. Pete for some of the plays as well as Free Fall. And one of the plays at American Theater, we walked in, gave our ticket, and they handed out earplugs. Well, this is reverse, isn't it? But I'm a person who's so sensitive to loud noises, I thought, oh, thank you. Thank you. That was such an honor. So I have provided much to think about this morning. I have printed copies. I encourage you to order the book, read it, Subtle Acts of Exclusion. Perhaps the library has it. Let's work on, because we want to be Unitarian Universalists, we want to be the person we say we are aspiring to those actions. We also have developmental goals. When I came here, I didn't come up with these. You all said these are areas. We want to create a culture of mutual trust between the congregation, lay leadership, and the minister, the staff, strengthening our ability to have healthy disagreements that deepen relationships, moving from an I church to a we church, balancing individual needs with beloved community, and creating a congregation of encompassing hospitality, prompting multifaceted growth at UUC. So next week, in part 2, I will address what to do when we fall short of our attempts to become better individuals. It includes discussions about forgiveness.